In January 1968, Vietnam entered its most sacred holiday, while thousands of soldiers secretly prepared for a massive offensive. Then, without warning, coordinated attacks erupted across South Vietnam, striking cities, military bases, and government centers almost simultaneously. Saigon came under attack, Hue became a battlefield, and fighting suddenly reached places once considered relatively secure from war. American and South Vietnamese forces eventually regained lost ground, while communist forces suffered devastating casualties across the offensive. Yet Tet would become one of history's strangest paradoxes, a military defeat that helped transform the entire war. By January 1968, American leaders believed communist forces were weakening after years of increasingly intense military pressure. More than 500,000 American troops were now deployed across South Vietnam, supported by powerful aircraft and artillery. Military commanders pointed toward battlefield statistics as evidence that the United States was gradually gaining the upper hand. Yet beyond American positions, North Vietnamese leaders were preparing a strategy designed to transform the war dramatically. Their plan called for coordinated attacks against cities, military installations, and government centers throughout South Vietnam during Tet. Tet traditionally brought celebrations and family reunions, creating an atmosphere seemingly far removed from preparations for major fighting. Behind that appearance of normality, weapons, ammunition, and fighters were secretly moving toward targets across South Vietnam. Some weapons entered cities hidden among ordinary goods, while assault units quietly gathered near their assigned objectives. The attackers hoped surprise and simultaneous pressure would overwhelm defenses, while encouraging broader resistance against the South Vietnamese government. As January ended, millions prepared to celebrate Tet, unaware that one of the war's largest offensives was approaching. During the final nights of January, Tet celebrations spread across Vietnam as families gathered beneath lanterns and fireworks. But beneath the celebrations, assault units moved toward their targets, carrying weapons through darkness while defenders remained largely unaware. Then attacks erupted across South Vietnam, striking provincial capitals, military installations, airfields, and government facilities in rapid succession. The scale of the assault shocked defenders as reports of fighting arrived almost simultaneously from numerous locations. In Saigon, Viet Cong assault teams struck critical targets, bringing intense fighting directly into the South Vietnamese capital. One assault team attacked the American embassy compound, creating images that quickly became symbols of Tet's extraordinary surprise. American military police and reinforcements fought to secure the embassy compound as gunfire echoed through surrounding streets. Elsewhere in Saigon, fighting erupted near government buildings, military facilities, neighborhoods, and strategically important transportation routes across the capital. South Vietnamese and American forces rapidly mobilized, moving reinforcements toward threatened districts while attempting to contain multiple attacks. By daylight, smoke hung above Saigon, revealing that Tet had transformed the capital into an unexpected urban battlefield. Across Saigon, scattered assault teams continued fighting from buildings and neighborhoods as American and South Vietnamese reinforcements arrived. Armored vehicles and infantry pushed into contested districts, confronting fighters concealed among houses, alleys, walls, and urban strongpoints. Street fighting became dangerous and confusing as soldiers searched buildings, while civilians struggled to escape areas caught between forces. South Vietnamese troops fought to secure government facilities and transportation routes essential for maintaining control across the threatened capital. American units reinforced key positions while helicopters moved above Saigon, carrying troops and supplies toward areas still under attack. Some Viet Cong units became isolated as Allied forces sealed streets, surrounded positions, and gradually reduced organized resistance. Fighting continued around several districts, leaving damaged buildings, abandoned barricades, and frightened civilians across once busy streets of Saigon. Within days, American and South Vietnamese forces regained most major positions, but scattered fighting continued around the capital. The attacks had failed to seize Saigon, yet their psychological impact reached far beyond the neighborhoods where fighting occurred. Farther north, however, another battle was becoming far more prolonged, destructive, and difficult to resolve. The fight for Hue.
In Hue, North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces entered the city rapidly, overwhelming several positions during the opening attack. Much of Hue quickly fell under communist control, while isolated South Vietnamese positions continued resisting inside the ancient city. South Vietnamese defenders held key positions, including their military headquarters, preventing complete control of Hue from being established. American Marines entered the fighting south of the Perfume River, encountering determined resistance among buildings, streets, and fortified positions. The Marines soon discovered that fighting through Hue required clearing buildings individually, while exposed streets remained dangerous killing grounds. Heavy resistance slowed the Marines, forcing them to combine infantry movement with tanks and supporting fire against fortified positions. Walls and buildings concealed defensive positions, allowing North Vietnamese forces to resist repeated American advances through southern Hue. Progress was measured in streets and buildings as Marines repeatedly attacked, withdrew, reorganized, and advanced again under fire. Artillery, tanks, and aircraft increasingly supported ground forces, but commanders faced the danger of destroying Hue's historic city. North of the Perfume River, the citadel presented an even greater challenge. Protected by massive walls and determined defenders, South Vietnamese troops fought through the citadel, advancing slowly against fortified positions hidden among walls, buildings, and narrow passages. Days of rain, smoke, and constant fighting exhausted both attackers and defenders, as the struggle continued street by street. As Allied forces advanced deeper into Hue, weeks of combat left entire neighborhoods heavily damaged and civilians displaced. By late February, Allied forces had retaken the citadel, ending organized North Vietnamese control over most of Hue. After nearly a month of fighting, Hue was retaken, but the ancient city had paid a devastating price. After the initial shock, American and South Vietnamese forces reorganized rapidly, launching counterattacks across cities and military installations. Reinforcements moved toward threatened areas, while armored vehicles and infantry reopened roads, connecting isolated positions with larger defensive forces. Helicopters carried troops rapidly between battle zones, allowing commanders to reinforce threatened positions and pursue retreating enemy units. Superior mobility and firepower gradually shifted momentum as attacking formations struggled to maintain positions inside populated areas. Outside the cities, American and South Vietnamese forces searched surrounding villages and countryside for units withdrawing from failed attacks. Many attacking units had suffered severe losses, weakening their ability to hold territory against increasingly coordinated Allied counterattacks. Across many towns, Allied forces steadily restored control, while remaining enemy units withdrew toward rural strongholds and jungles. The offensive failed to trigger the widespread uprising its planners anticipated, leaving attacking forces increasingly isolated and vulnerable. By the following weeks, most urban objectives had been retaken, leaving the offensive with enormous losses on both sides. Militarily, the attackers had suffered heavily, but Tet's greatest consequences would emerge far beyond Vietnam's immediate battlefields. When the fighting subsided, civilians emerged to find homes, businesses, and entire neighborhoods transformed by weeks of combat. Thousands of families had been displaced, carrying whatever they could salvage while searching for shelter away from devastated districts. Markets, schools, temples, and ordinary streets had become battlefields, disrupting daily life across communities caught inside the offensive. For many Vietnamese civilians, Tet became remembered not as celebration, but as sudden violence, displacement, and loss. The battle also exhausted soldiers, many surviving days of combat with little sleep, constant danger, and uncertainty. North Vietnamese and Viet Cong units also endured devastating losses, leaving many formations weakened after prolonged fighting across South Vietnam. Hospitals struggled with overwhelming demand as medical teams treated wounded soldiers and civilians. Throughout cities affected by the offensive, refugee centers expanded rapidly as displaced families gathered in schools, temples, churches, and temporary shelters seeking safety. Beyond immediate casualties, destroyed homes and disrupted livelihoods, created consequences that continued long after the shooting had ended. Yet the consequences of Tet would extend beyond ruined cities, reaching television screens and political debates across America. On American television, images from Tet appeared nightly, bringing unexpected urban battles directly into millions of American homes. The scale of the offensive challenged earlier assurances that communist forces were weakening, and battlefield progress remained steadily achievable. Militarily, communist forces suffered enormous losses, yet surviving the offensive did not automatically produce a clear American victory. For many Americans, the question became increasingly unavoidable. If victory was approaching, how could Tet have happened? The credibility gap between optimistic official statements and disturbing battlefield images became increasingly important in American debate over Vietnam. Newspapers and television repeatedly showed damaged cities, exhausted soldiers, and fighting, previously believed far from major population centers. Public confidence weakened as Americans increasingly questioned whether military success could actually deliver the victory their government had promised. Political pressure intensified in Washington as leaders confronted difficult choices about troop levels, strategy, negotiations, and America's commitment. President Lyndon Johnson faced mounting pressure as Tet intensified doubts about escalation and the future direction of American strategy. Tet had not defeated American forces militarily, but it transformed the political environment surrounding the war almost overnight. After Tet, American leaders reconsidered whether further escalation could achieve decisive results without imposing even greater military and political costs. Military commanders requested additional troops, but the administration increasingly questioned whether expanding the war offered a sustainable solution. Public opposition continued growing as Tet reinforced doubts about expanding a conflict already demanding enormous resources, lives, and attention. On March 31st, President Johnson announced limits on bombing North Vietnam while calling for negotiations toward a political settlement. Then Johnson delivered another stunning announcement. He would neither seek nor accept his party's nomination for another presidential term. The announcement demonstrated how dramatically America's political landscape had changed during the 2 months following the Tet attacks. Soon afterward, diplomatic efforts accelerated as Washington and Hanoi moved toward negotiations aimed at finding a path beyond escalation. In May 1968, American and North Vietnamese representatives began formal peace talks in Paris, opening a difficult diplomatic process. Negotiations did not end the war quickly, but they signaled that military escalation alone no longer defined American strategy. Tet became a turning point because battlefield outcomes, public opinion, and political strategy now moved in dramatically different directions. Tet failed to deliver the decisive military victory communist planners sought, and attacking forces paid an extraordinarily heavy price. Yet the offensive demonstrated that communist forces could coordinate attacks across South Vietnam on an astonishing scale. For the United States, Tet exposed the growing distance between battlefield measurements and public expectations of approaching victory. For South Vietnam, the offensive revealed both the resilience of its forces and the vulnerability of cities and civilians. For Vietnam itself, the offensive left destroyed communities, displaced families, and memories extending far beyond military statistics. The war continued for years afterward, proving that even a historic turning point does not immediately determine an ending. In later years, historians would continue debating Tet's military results, political consequences, and influence on American strategy. What remains undeniable is that Tet permanently changed how governments, soldiers, journalists, and civilians understood the Vietnam War. The offensive proved that winning battles and winning a war were not always the same thing in Vietnam. Tet did not end the Vietnam War, but after 1968, the war would never be understood the same way.